get some of that color in there, and say you can actually see where it stops on the white. Take that little bit of paint off, and I will feather in that edge on the top. Done. Done deal. I do that all the time now. So I'll get my color in there, I'll get it on perfectly smooth down here. Like this. That's kind of thick, but it gets the point across. Take my paint off my brush and then feather in just that top little edge. So that you're starting to get the semblance of a blend there, right? But really quick, like you're seeing results and you're not like, okay, 42 hours later, I can kind of see a little bit of a little something. I don't even know what it is. That was a big problem for me for a long time. It was just like, I paint for, like I said, I painted the head of a guy for 7 hours, and it's still on my shelf, not done, because I never want to touch that model again. It's just too long. Now, in contrast, I spent over 100 hours on this piece right here, but it was all 100 productive hours, and it was fun the whole way. I saw things happening, things were moving and grooving. I was like, okay, my vision's coming to life, and then my vision would change, and I would go in a different direction. But the whole time, it was like a forward-moving thing. So that's where I think a lot of people get discouraged in painting, is because you've got, you see these things online all the time, thin your paints down, keep them thin them more. And what that actually does is it prevents you from getting any color going. And I mean, you can eventually do it, and I know guys do, but I just don't have the patience or the time to spend that long, to be honest. Now, here's another cool, so that's the one little blending thing with doing kind of like layers, but it's a different kind of layer. The other thing is called two-brush blending. I don't know if any of you have ever heard of it. Let's see. So two-brush blending kind of became popular. There was this company up in Seattle, and they had this guy over there from England, and he developed this way of painting. And basically, it's put paint on and then rub it off. So, kind of like what I did with licking my brush off and then feathering that in. The thing that makes it work is your saliva. Saliva is actually like anti-paint repellent, so it will have a tendency to push paint away. And I didn't know this at first. I kept trying it, and I was failing at it. And then I talked to one of the guys that actually worked for this company, Privateer Press, and he's like, yeah, the key is your spit. So like, don't lick your brush off and leave it completely dry. Like, you got to leave a little moisture in there. And what happens is your saliva will work up into the paint and actually push the color that you put down back up, and then you pull it back down. And I've seen guys who do this who are really good at this. I mean, go from like white to black in 1 or 2 hits, because they can push that paint back up and pull the highlight back down, and it actually fans it out and feathers it perfectly, so it blends really good. So that's another way to go really fast. So basically, what you do in that technique, this might be the trick is, if you're not real good at it, don't go too drastic between your colors. Like, don't go from blue to white, go from blue to light blue. So what you would do is you'd put this color on, and then you come in with your second brush that's clean, with a little spit on it, you work it back up into there, and then pull it back down. And what it does is it softens that edge between the colors. Now, when you're putting base coats on a model, what I always do is I do a global vision first. So like, perfect example, like for your horse, which I thought that brown is super rad. For your horse, if I was starting that horse, I would have my areas where I know it's going to be light and dark, and I would paint all that in first with no detail. So like on this cape, what we've got is you paint in your color, your base coats, get them good and clean on there. And then once that's on, basically you come back in with your lighter color, and you gotta let that other part dry. But and do a 2-brush blend and kind of erase that area. So you're starting to just get the outline of colors. So I've got some brights up here, and I have some shadows down the bottom. I haven't done anything where I'm like putting like highlights down the ripples of the cloak or anything. I'm just getting that basic, like the first snapshot of it, my vision. Like, this is how my light's going to be. That's easy to change. It's hard to get to the point where you're almost done and then you're like, wow, my light's way off. Or, you know, that's not fun at all. So you get your global, it's almost like airbrushing with a paintbrush. So you get that spotlight effect, you get a shadow effect, you got your midtone, and then you start detailing and finishing the model. But you can do that very quickly with these techniques. The 2-brush blending technique works really well. Now, the next technique I'll show you, this is called a filbert brush. So that's a small one. This is a little bit bigger one so you can see. They're flat like a chisel, but they're rounded at the top. You can just get these at Michael's or whatever. I just bought these a week ago. Watched the video that James Wapple guy did, and in one of his videos he actually shows how he uses the filbert brush, and I was like, well, I'm going to try that, and yeah, I'm not looking back. It's just unbelievable. So this brush is cool because I guess with the rounded edge at the top, it leaves soft strokes. It just can't leave a hard edge, as opposed to when you have a regular brush, you know, usually you have these edges on both sides and everything. So the way this works is you put everything on at once, and you're able to blend everything in with this brush, and it's amazing. It just blends automatically. Now, for a competition type miniature, you really do want to take your time and watch where everything's happening, because you will have some streakiness and everything, but you can easily fix that. But it's harder to fix once the paint's dry. So basically, this is kind of a wet on wet technique. You're going to have your colors on your palette. Let's see.
What primer do you use? Because it looks like it really soaks up the paint quickly.
That primer, actually, that model was in my chest for a while. That's probably GW primer right there. I've been using the, oh man, what's it called? Duplicolor? Duplicolor Automotive Sanding Primer. You get it from Kragen or whatever. You have to have sandable primer. But it works really well. It goes on kind of slow, like when you're spraying. Like I spray most things black nowadays because I airbrush a white on top of them. But so the black goes on really slowly. It's almost see-through at first, and then it kind of gets to gray, and you're just like, oh my gosh, is this thing ever going to prime? But it's a really good primer. It holds well, and it's very thin. So you just live with that. So let's see here. This is one of the cool. This is probably the coolest way I've ever seen a blend in my life. It's like a game changer, maybe.
Whose technique was that?
James Wapple. He's a pretty famous like science fiction miniatures painter. He was like a graphic artist like for comic books and stuff before, and then he got sucked into miniatures and stuff. But he's like a true artist. Like he paints just like I would imagine like Bob Ross or somebody. It's just crazy.
No,
and he is a little
he
bit
paints better than Bob Ross.
Well, the same style though, just very, so let's see. Got a few colors out. Everyone hates black, but I really like it. But in very small amounts. Okay, so the way this one works, so I've got a little bit of my highlight color. I don't typically use white for highlights, but on certain colors, white just looks rad. So I got that. I'm going to put in a little bit of this orangish brown for my shadow with a little bit of the red further on. This is the other cool thing with the wet palette is you just have all your colors out. Don't worry about it. Maybe a little bit of black in there. Sometimes just subtle colors. And then you pretend to be an artist. So put in my midtones. The cool thing about this is it deposits a really good amount of paint And you can put it on very quickly and feel like you're just some crazy painter. Because it's flat and wide, it's very easy to get the paint on. Which is always my problem. You always have these like little micro holes and stuff, and there's still a bead of white showing through. It's really awful. So then you can just come in and start mixing in your other colors. Brush. The cool thing with this is since you're just using all the colors pretty much wet on wet, they all kind of blend together and they all look like they belong together. Like sometimes I used to paint things and my highlight was just in the wrong family, you know, it was like, oh, it's not good. So if you're light with your touch, you can just start blending in. I found a real heavy hand when you start blending doesn't work so well. It's that kind of light. And I'm pulling back. Also with the flatness of the brush, you can actually go like this cape. I don't really like this cape. It's too wonky. I guess for a while it was really cool to have things that were really bumpy, but it's really hard to put a freehand on this. And this model is nothing without having some sort of tapestry freehand on the back or something cool to look at. And with all those bumps, it's gonna be pretty much impossible. So. I do a lot of brush looking, you probably noticed.
And that's just to thin the paint off the brush?
Yeah. I manipulate it's my spit manipulation. Grab some more paint. Switch to a little bit smaller. So when I grab paint, especially when I'm doing these delicate things, I always make sure it's very flat on my palette. I kind of rub I rub it out a little bit. So that way I have very little paint going, but I have enough to change my color. So like, I'm going to start pulling this reddish color in here, or this orangish color into my shadows.
When you're pulling down, you're trying to put more paint at the end? That's
Yeah.
kind of what it does? Yeah.
Because everything's pretty wet still, it's pretty easy to go back and fix things. Or you can even use your finger, kind of blend stuff in. I like doing that. Kind of real light with the touch too, just to not be too drastic with my colors. The edges of the brush, if you're real light with your touch, these rounded edges with the brush will allow it to look more feathered as your brush goes away. So it's just not so drastic.
That's a nice size brush.
And it's a big brush, yeah. The work is very quick. Again, I'm not finishing this model, but I'm gonna get it to a point where I can finish it pretty quickly. Whereas used to with my other blending techniques, it would be hours before I got to the point where I was like, I had my darks pretty dark, and okay, well I need to start finishing this piece off. This way I can get my first general vision of the model right away. Like within 10 or 15 minutes, I'm like, okay, that looks pretty cool. Yeah, in 10 or 15 minutes, I'm not too opposed to throw all that away and start over.